Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about cloud computing at Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, two huge agencies. And we're actually talking about priorities. I'm going to throw it over to you, Richard. I'm sure you've got plenty of those. What are the top priorities for you this year?
In particular, as it intersects with cloud computing and the technology, some of our priorities are really around better sharing and partnering, and in particular, sharing without making yet another copy of the data, right? When we talk about what's going on at the Southwest border and the need for sharing information from Border Patrol to enforcement and removals, CIS and Department of State, and even the military, we're finding that the old ways of doing things aren't cutting it anymore. And we're taking advantage of what we can do in the cloud and with some of these software as a service offerings in order to really expedite that processing. We're also interested, the technologist in me is very interested in things like containerization and serverless, because that will continue to bring excellence in our implementations. And as a number of others mentioned, zero trust, because of the prevalence that it's taken on. I really want to think of zero trust as a mindset change and a journey, and not just a destination or things to check off a to-do list. It really needs, like the cloud, it needs to change how we think about doing things, and make certain that it's all baked in as we go, and not just meeting some metric or checklist that gets put down in front of us.
Very key catch. Of course, what gets measured gets done. But we want to make sure that's done in the correct kind of way. Aaron, how about at ServiceNow? Top priorities for you over there?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And Rich, I agree with you. Zero trust being, kind of the buzzword of 2022 and critical to everything as a common denominator. But to shift from that a little bit, just for some other focus areas for ServiceNow, Rich, you mentioned supporting the mission. And what's interesting, you made the comment of where's my data? And that's a great question, because it's a question not only are the government employees and our constituents asking, but also our adversaries. And so knowing that information is a currency and that it's something that's of value, and getting it into the hands of the right people and protecting it from the hands of the wrong people is going to be critical as we go forward this year. The second is, if COVID taught us anything, that things can change on a global scale unexpectedly, very quickly. So low code, no code type of developments. Paul, you mentioned, your software factories as well. Those are going to be critical successes, not just for this year, but obviously going forward. That really is the future. And then we mentioned the maximization of value for cloud. We're doing a great job, but we're using 21st technology like Zoom and ServiceNow platforms, but you can do an interview on Zoom and then go back and still do a manual paper process to hire the person after the interview. And so there's still a lot of evolution that needs to happen, but we're getting close, and it's happening at a very rapid pace. And it's going to be very exciting to bring the service, the people, the data all into one place.
Good catch on the data. I always say the bad guys aren't coming into our environments to see how cool the networks are. They're coming in here to steal the data, right? So great catch there. John, how about at DISA? Top priorities for you this year and next?
So we have a couple of really big priorities. I already talked a little bit about the OCONUS push towards pushing cloud connectivity and edge compute towards the tactical edge for the warfighter. One of our big focus is JADC2, which is the ultimately combining all of the command and control systems within the department together. We view cloud as a key enabler to making that happen. Not necessarily that it's a cloud capability, but we view cloud as a key enabler for making that capability happen. So down that road, we're doing a couple things. We have what's called JWCC, the Joint Warfighter Cloud Contract, which is out being developed right now, and the idea there is it's going to be that bulk buying contract where mission partners can leverage to get their cloud computing needs without having to do individual contracts for every service agency at COCOM. The other thing we're working on is, and I hate to piggyback on the zero trust effort, but that seems to be worn out as we get going, but we have a project underway called Thunderdome, which is basically a proof of concept of how we can do zero trust, in the department and still meet all of our security requirements. So piggyback a little bit about what Matthew and Paul were talking about there. Thunderdome is actually an effort for us to put those practices into play. And then containers, right? So we've talked a little bit about containers and Kubernetes, how that fits into the overall cloud picture from an individual services and agencies perspective. We're actually doing a containers as a service capability that we're launching this year, based around Kubernetes, where you'll be able to build containers and move them from on-prem to off-prem to commercial cloud to back on-prem to meet your mission needs. And we view, containers as kind of that key enabler for making that transition happen in that hybrid model that I talked about early on.
John, if I may, I'm going to ask you to just give a layman's definition of containers. People hear containers and they're wondering, are these containers that are in the ocean that are, I'm waiting for my my pressure washer to show up? What's a container?
Yeah, so when we talk about containers, I hate to say a product name, but we're typically talking about Docker containers in the Kubernetes environment, where you're abstracting the security and the capabilities away from the operating system that's running in the cloud and to a container, which is a standardized box, for lack of better, a logical box that runs in the environment that you can run a series of services in. So what most organizations are doing is they're leveraging containers for very specialized services. So you have web server containers and you have database containers, and you get to kind of plug and play those containers together to create your applications in a kind of streamlined fashion. So
kind of a Lego block environment. Thank you for that explanation. I apologize for putting you on the spot there. All right, Stephen, top priority at Snowflake.
Yeah. So one of the things Paul hit on is really top of mind is data sovereignty, and that's something that's going to affect every, not just federal, commercial, because you're seeing a lot of laws around the globe affecting data sovereignty, which is a little bit of an anti-pattern in the cloud in a lot of ways, right? But you're going to have to deal with that, and so there's also data sovereignty within agencies, within governments, right? You're not necessarily sharing, and so that's going back to the data sharing theme. Some of the things we're working on, like operationalizing some things like we call data clean room, right? Being able to allow other entities within your own organization to do analytics against your data, right? You still own your data, you're not moving your data in an anonymized way to give them results without actually having to share that data out, right? So there's some really interesting things going on around that when it gets into the classifications of data and how to do some of these different things, levels of anonymization of data. But the key is to democratize. It's about democratizing data in a secure way, right? And so a lot of the stuff that we're doing with kind of the concept of data clean rooms and operationalizing that to allow that data democratization while maintaining that security boundary is really interesting, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there to work with the government in some of those respects. I would say the second thing is enablement of everybody wants to talk about AI, machine learning, and stuff, but really that's about the data, right? And really operationalizing the way that data products are built, so that your machine learning engineers and logistics, for example, or some other domain doesn't have is able to really add value back to the organization, not having to do all of the 80% work we talk about
Sure.
in the data wrangling space and all of that. And so being able to operationalize building those data products for those communities of interest is something that's a pretty big focus as well. We've got a lot of features that are currently coming or coming out that are really designed to really enable those communities so that they don't have to do a lot of that work, right? They're able to focus on what's how to return value back to the organization versus these non-value added activities.
No doubt, so that they're not wrestling with that 80%. These data scientists can do what they've been hired to do. Thank you very much for that. All right, we're going to wrap it up with this last question that we love to end with. I'm going to start with you, Aaron, and we're going to talk about the future. Let's fast forward 2 or 3 years. What's it look like out there? What's the demand signal that's coming into ServiceNow? What can we expect to see?
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, the future is bright. So we talked a lot about supporting the mission, IT moving over to OT, and the data being part of the value that's going to be delivering a faster, better, more efficient service, whether it's the military's mission or protecting our homeland with DHS. Everything becoming a service really means understanding the people and the non-people assets and how they impact the service, and how do we do that in a better manner with more efficient workflow, automation, artificial intelligence that's been mentioned today. As our CEO Bill McDermott says, it's all about the people, right? So we got to take care of the people, the experience that they're having, the competition that government has with hiring employees from commercial. The experience that we provide is going to be critical as we are seeing a shift in generations and a new group coming on that are used to mobile, used to automation. And we talked about zero trust being baked into everything. And then really it's about the mission, right? How are we better enabling our federal agencies to go out there and provide a better service, albeit whatever their focus is. So in the next couple of years with cloud computing, you're going to see it done on a global scale. It's going to be done at a rapid speed because of low code, no code type of capabilities. And it's going to be a pretty exciting time.
Looking forward to that. Thank you, Stephen. How about at Snowflake? What's it going to look like? What's that environment going to look like? What's the capability going to be in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think the biggest trend, kind of building on the operationalization space, apologize for that, is seeing a lot of that getting more embedded into the business, into the organization. Because, with a lot of these, I mentioned SaaS earlier on in the program, a lot of these, you don't have that traditional IT function. And so like with, I'm going to use the example of the product like Snowflake, it's really a no ops product, right? You don't have to be a database administrator necessarily to use it, right? That's the kind of the point of it. And so you're going to push a lot of, the operational components of data, for example, closer to the mission, right? We're talking about tactical edge and things like that. We're doing where people are actually supporting the organization in technology in a lot of ways is just the enabler of that, right? And so with a lot of the tech, like in the direction we're going, it's really in that no ops model where there's not a lot of maintenance overhead, right? And so it's pushing it closer to it's like logistics in the Army, for example, or an HR function or a mission function or something like that. And so you're going to see decentralization of some of that, right? And which actually leads back in kind of the data sharing discussion, where now that you're decentralizing some of that, I still need to be able to get at that data where I don't have to move it, but I want to democratize it in a secure way. But I think you're starting to see a convergence of a lot of the technology within the organization and kind of starting to dissipate from necessarily like a central IT, for example.
Sure. That no ops play, sort of citizen services, ties right into the ServiceNow play as well, but certainly got to secure all this. So Matt, what's it look like? How do you stitch all that together and make sure it's secure?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the future for government services is that they are going to look more like what our major SaaS platforms today look like: ServiceNows, Prisma Clouds, the Office 365s. And I think the reason that, those SaaS platforms have been so successful is that, they've efficiently met the need of the user, and they allow them to do it in a way that's secure. So if you look at what the large SaaS providers today give you, that's really going to be a picture of what we see the movement to cloud to look like specifically for government services. And I think, as Paul mentioned, this entire process it's not really just about deploying cool tech, but it's actually modernizing the organizational practices and structures. That's why when I hear about what is being done in DISA with combining different functions, that is really what this whole move is about. It's not just Kubernetes and Docker and all these fun pieces of tech. Certainly they are enablers, but I think it's actually the organizational change component. And I think as you go down that route, we have to remember that there will be an increased reliance on third-party supply chains. That's just a natural part of this kind of ecosystem. And one interesting anecdote I'll bring up is our threat researchers, they did a hands-on red team exercise about 2-3 months ago on behalf of a large SaaS provider, and it only took them 3 days to discover a critical software development flaw that could have exposed the customer to an attack very similar to that of SolarWinds and Kaseya. So I think we've got to keep those types of risks in mind as well as we go through this. But certainly there are opportunities to utilize cloud native architectures, but at the same time keeping those risks in mind to make sure that you have the visibility around that entire cloud native supply chain.
No doubt, and the entire ecosystem looks forward to a 3-day to a 3-hour to a 3-minute in the future. Richard, how about at immigration and customs enforcement? If I'm a freshly minted agent or officer coming out of the academy, you're going to hand me a firearm, a badge, and a PDA and say, go off and do important things. How's it going to work in 2 or 3 years?
Absolutely. We're going to do that. Mobility is a big part of what we're doing now and looking at in the future. Consistent with a number of the other comments here, of whether it is no ops or optimization of services and containerization, the technology is going to continue to advance. And whether we go to containerization or even serverless, we find we can cut out even more of the supporting infrastructure. One of the things that I think will be interesting is, as was also mentioned, I think we need to bring along the additional supporting services, be it acquisitions or security or scaling, so that we can get the entire government organized into procuring all of these services by the drink. We're even talking about, a lot of our data scientists today have to spend an enormous amount of time setting up their laptop in order to do the work that they want to do. We want them to go to a website and just have it all there contained within the cloud so that we can further reduce any likelihood of breaches. So the optimization and catching up all of these pieces up across the enterprise, I think, is where we're going to go, and how we'll ultimately deliver faster to our customers or the government services.
No doubt that every data scientist and every officer and every agent absolutely looking forward to that. Thank you, Richard. John, how about at DISA? You have a daunting task over there. Paint a picture. What's it going to look like? What's the vision, the intent over the next 2 to 3 years?
So a lot of what I talked about today has been really the closest wolf to the sled, which has been focusing on how do we fix infrastructure as a service capabilities in the cloud, right? And when we talk about IaaS, we're talking about things like containers, and we're talking about zero trust and all those kind of functionality that we've talked about. And that, like I said, that's the nearest wolf in the sled, and that's what we're really focused on. But when you talk about the future, right, what we really see is to piggyback on what the other guys were talking about, is SaaS, software as a service, is really where we see the department going from an overall cloud perspective. And things like our DOS capability, the Defense Enterprise Office Suite, putting out Office 365 to the entire Department of Defense. That's just like the first step, right? And as we piggyback on that and continue to roll out more and more capabilities, once again, based on things like ServiceNow and other software as a service providers, that's where we see the department going, right? I mean, 10 years ago, the department leaders would have never thought about trusting commercial mission partners with their data. In today's world, we have to, right? It's not whether or not we do, it's we have to. We have to move to software as a service to survive in the climate that we're in from a budget perspective. We just can't afford to continue to do business the way that we've done it in the past. And so that's, when we talk about the future, software as a service, I think, is where we're ultimately going to end up. There's still a need for things like infrastructure as a service and platform as a service for certain mission needs and niche capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're going to see SaaS take over a large part of the compute within a department.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of SaaS, Paul, you spoke a lot about it. If you could fast forward with this small but mighty organization of yours, what's it going to look like? What do you expect to see? What kind of capabilities can the Army expect in 3 years from your agency?
So I think it's my agency, and right, we've got a lot of partners, and the only way we'll succeed is with those partners. What I see I'll drop it in three things. First, I think you're going to see the Army and really the DoD start to lean into delivering mission capabilities as a service, like across the entire spectrum. And where we're leveraging infrastructure or platform or SaaS to do that, kind of to a degree irrelevant, but starting to deliver a capability built once that's scalable for many, that many can consume as a service, that starts to eat at some of the common things that we do across our business, our intelligence, our enterprise, and our warfighting mission areas, I think is going to be a way that you start to see ourselves start to organize, because far too often we're duplicating effort and services across every single one of those verticals, and we're wasting a lot of time, but also a lot of money and a lot of people on those things. And so rather than doing them 1,000 different ways, starting to see best practices emerge as like this way to do business, and starting to see that delivered as a service, I think is going to break down some barriers. I think that's going to force us to change the way that we organize, which is the second thing. I'm a big fan of looking at the value stream. Everyone that works at the ECMA knows that when we talk about great excellence and meeting a customer at the front door of the beginning of their cloud journey, but they're not able to move through the process, start building in the cloud and delivering capabilities to the soldier, we haven't succeeded. And so my team understands the entire value stream for the product and service that we're delivering. And so I think you're going to see the Army and really the DoD start to change the way that we organize, because we break product life cycles across numerous organizations. When I first came on board, the roles of the ECMA were actually split across 8 different organizations, not just within the United States Army. That's just pain for a customer. And so I think we need to start to eliminate that pain and change the way that we organize ourselves. And I think it'll help us visualize that value stream. And then finally, the third, I think you're going to see leaders start to understand the line between people and technology, and how they can leverage technology as a force multiplier for the way that we fight. Far too often in the DoD, we solve problems with hundreds of people that technology has already solved. We need to stop doing that. Great example across the Army, but someone turned to me and said, Paul, I had my senior leader turn to me, a software developer, to solve a problem rather than the 100 of infantrymen that they would typically turn to.
Wow.
That's transformational. I think you're going to see leadership that start to understand how to lead technology and lead people, and see where that line is ever so changing between the two. If we just focus on some technology now, in 2 to 3 years, we're going to be irrelevant, because we're still going to be depending on the way that we used to do business. We have to teach people the why of what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it, and then understand the different ways of how they can do that with the technology that's emerging at the time. We need to teach leaders to understand that line, not just to understand a specific technology. And so I think you're going to see a fundamental change in the way that we promote leadership into the future, to lead us into the digital age, and then not just thrive within it, but to be the dominant leaders within it.
Fantastic, and a great way to end our show today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this program. I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting us on the show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make the program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, we'd like to thank you, the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.